Hi, welcome to this DCP web tutorial. In today's tutorial, we're using Blender 2.8 to create a high resolution smoke simulation which looks similar to this. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up Blender, and like usual we'll go ahead and click on General here. I'm just going to turn on my screencast key so that you can see what I'm clicking on, and you'll see that down here, the keys that I'm pressing. I'm going to click on the cube and delete that, and I'm going to click on this light source and delete that as well. And I'm going to go to File, Save As, and let me just save my work as we go along. Let's just call this Smoke Simulation High Resolution. So we're going to make a smoke simulation in Blender which is going to be high resolution. So we'll click Save there. Let's press Shift and A, and we want to add an Ico Sphere. So we have an Ico Sphere here, and the quickest way to get smoke simulation working in Blender is to select this Ico Sphere, go to Object, go to Quick Effects, and then select Quick Smoke. So here we can see the Ico Sphere, and we can see this orangey yellow box around it, and this box is actually what we call the domain, and that domain is where the smoke will be simulated. So if this Ico Sphere sits outside of the domain, it won't be simulated. So if I go ahead and click play, you can see the smoke here now, right? You can see that smoke. If I press G to grab this, if I move it around in this domain, the smoke will be rendered or generated. If I move it outside, it will stop. So the smoke will only be generated within the realms of this domain. So we'll pause this and go back to the first frame, and we want to press number 3. Number 3 will take us into, actually we'll press number 1. Let's press number 1. That will take us into the front orthographic, and we want to press Control Alt and 0. Control Alt 0 will move the camera to that position so we can see it from the front now. And we want to make this smoke domain box a little bit bigger. We want to make it a little bit bigger than what the camera is. So first of all, I think it'd be wise if we click on the camera, and you can probably just about see the smoke domain box here. And all we really want to do is set the Z to 0, and then on the Y axis, let's see, actually on the Z axis we just want to move it up a little bit so that the smoke domain, you kind of got a few options here. I think we'll leave it around here. Really we want the bottom of the camera to be on the bottom edge, front edge of this smoke domain. Let's click on the smoke domain itself, and we want to scale it out a bit. So let's just press S to scale and scale it out a little bit, something like this. Let's see, probably around here. So we want to make sure if we press 0 that there's a gap at the top here. We're going to probably make it a little bit taller, but what would be wise is if we click on the smoke domain, we just want to move it up a little bit. So on the Z axis we just want to raise it up so there's a gap above, and we're going to have our smoke floating down. And we want to click on this smoke domain and make it wider. So on the width, which will be the x-axis, the X scale here, we just want to scale it out so that the back edges here, these back edges here, are a little bit wider than the camera view, because our smoke's going to flow down and it's going to bounce off the floor and kind of move around this scene a little bit. That's what we want to try and do. So what we want to do now is click on this Ico Sphere. Let's just see if we can go into, we'll click on the Ico Sphere, and we're going to press G to grab it. In fact, what will be wise is we click on this and let's just center it out. So on the X location, we want to set that to 0. So it's nice and centered like this. And then we can just grab this. So press G to grab it, then Z, and then move it above the camera. We want to move it above the camera. But we want to make sure that it's still sitting inside our smoke domain. Can you see it's sitting outside? If we press number 3, we can see the Ico Sphere is on the outside of the smoke domain. So let's press 0 again. And what we want to do is make sure that this back line here is higher than the Ico Sphere. So if we click on the smoke domain, we can press S to scale and then Z and just scale it out a little bit. Let's scale it outwards like this to around here, and we're going to just move it up so this bottom line here is at the bottom of the camera. Let's press G to grab and then Z and just move it up a little bit. Now when we rotate around, we can see the smoke domain is covering the sphere, and if we press 0, the sphere is sitting above the camera. So if we click play now, we can see the smoke is going to be going in this upwards direction. We want the smoke to be going downwards, so let's just go to File, Save, Okay, so at the moment when we click play, we see the smoke is going upwards, so we want it to flow downwards. And what we'll do is click on the Ico Sphere, and we'll go to the physics settings here. And inside the physics settings, we've got various options. We'll go through some of these today. And the one that we really want to look at is temperature difference. So at the moment it's set to 1. So that means there's some, you can think there's heat in this, in the smoke, and that will make the smoke rise. So we want to make the smoke cold. So let's set that to -1. If we set it to a -1 value and click play, now we can see the smoke is going to flow downwards. We want it to flow in this downwards direction. So it's pretty straightforward to get the smoke to flow downwards, but at the moment it's not really colliding against anything, right? You can see it just flows downwards, and when it hits the bottom of this smoke domain, it's just going to sort of dissipate, just fade away. And we don't want that. We want it to actually hit the floor and then start sort of flowing off to the sides a little bit. So we'll work on that in a moment. One thing we should do is turn on initial velocity. Basically, when we rotate this this Ico Sphere, so we're going to rotate it towards the end of this tutorial to animate the actual movement of the smoke, and this initial velocity will help to animate that smoke better. It will just look better. So we want to turn that on, and what we want to do is click on the smoke domain itself, and in the smoke domain, in the border collisions, we want to set it to collide all. Here, collide all. So we click on the smoke domain and go to border collisions, select collide all, and then what we will do is turn on adaptive domain as well. So what this does is, if adaptive domain is turned off, the Blender will basically use this whole domain to do the calculation. But when adaptive domain is on, if we were to go back and click play, you'll see the smoke domain will grow based on how much this smoke has been simulated, right? So you can see it kind of growing, this orange box like this. This just saves a lot of, well, a bit of memory for Blender. It's less calculations. And now you can start to see the smoke sort of swirling around in the scene. So let's go ahead and pause this. And we wanted it to flow down and do that, but you can see it's at a very low resolution. So later in the tutorial, we're going to bake this at a very, very high resolution, and we're going to increase the resolution divisions as well. So for now, we're going to leave it at low settings. Normally what I do is do the basic setup of my scene using the smoke simulation, and then apply all of the high resolution stuff that we're going to do later. The reason you do that is as soon as you start putting in a lot of resolution divisions here and you start using high resolutions here, Blender will slow down quite a lot, and we've got to do a bake of this, so we'll do that in a moment. Now what I would like to do is get the dissolve. So if I were to click play now, you can see, let's go back to the first frame, you can see the smoke will dissolve quite quickly here, right? So we can tell Blender how quickly to dissolve that smoke. At the moment it's flowing down, but it's not getting very, very far. So what we'll do is set this to a value of 15, and we'll see how well that performs. We want the smoke to actually disappear at some point. So that's just about hitting the floor here, you see? So we want to increase that. So let's set it to around 25, and we'll see how far it gets down. And this is how you can control how that smoke is going to flow off the edges. And I think a little bit more, maybe around 35 will be a good number. Let's see how that works. I think that's going to be pretty good. Maybe a bit more, let's say around 45. And sometimes in Blender you've got to experiment to get the right style and design of what you want. I think 45 is pretty good. I want it to kind of be flowing upwards like this. I think that looks pretty cool. And we want to control how much smoke is being emitted and when it stops and starts. So we'll work that out in a moment. Let's pause this and go back to the first frame. And if we go into the render view and click play, you'll see the smoke being emitted here, right? Like this is much more dense, and you can see it in the render view. So we're looking on the render tab here. But what I want to do is go over to the render settings, and in the settings here I want to turn on, or I want to enable volumetrics, right? So it's already enabled. If you turn that off, in theory you shouldn't really see anything here, but it seems to show, so it's fine. But we're going to leave volumetric lighting on, and we're going to set the tile size to a high value later, and we want to turn on shadows for now, and we're going to set this to a high value later as well. The smoke is very black, as you can see, and it's at a very low resolution, so we want to add some lighting into here. So let's pause this. We can pause it at the moment because the simulation is at a very low resolution. Blender, in terms of my own machine, depending on your computer, Blender can bake all of this out in real time. Yeah, it can actually simulate all of this in real time because it's at a very low resolution. When you start to apply high resolution to it, Blender will start to slow down and it's really going to struggle to calculate all of the smoke in high resolution. So we need to bake it a little bit later. But for now, we just want to add a few lights to illuminate this content. So let's press Shift and A, and we'll go to light, and we want to add a point light. So we've got one point light here. We're going to press G to grab it, and we want to press X to move it on the X axis, and we're going to move it to the side here, and maybe we'll press G to grab, then Z, and move it up slightly to about here. So let's just middle mouse click and check where that is. So that's in a pretty good position, right? In terms, sometimes when you're looking at it from the front, it might be all the way back over here. But to be fair, the light source is generated or created from the origin point, so it should always be in sort of a correct location. Let's click on this one, press Shift and D to duplicate it, Shift D, then hit Enter. And then let's press G to grab it, then X, and move it up. Let's see, I think we didn't duplicate that. Let's click it again, and we did. So we've got one point light here, and we've got another one here. So we're going to click on this one, press G to grab it, then X, and move it over to this side here. So we should have one on each side now. And we want one to be above. So let's just press, in fact, we'll just press Shift and D. In fact, we'll press Shift and A, and we'll add another light source. Let's add a point light. The reason I've done that is it's right in the middle, rather than dragging it and then centering it out at the top. We've got a new one here that we can just press G to grab, Z, and then move it just above here. Now what we want to do, let's just go into wireframe. Let's click on our Ico Sphere. Now really what I want to do is make this Ico Sphere a little bit smaller. So I'm going to select it, press S to scale, and scale it down a little bit. I don't want it to be so wide, it doesn't need to be that wide. And we need to make sure the light source is not inside of the Ico Sphere, it needs to be outside, right? This light source at the top here, this one. So that should be pretty good. We'll be able to test that in a moment anyway. Let's go back into our render view, and let's see, we probably want to add one more light source towards the bottom. So let's select this top one and press Shift and D to duplicate it, then press G to grab it, then Z, and move it down towards the bottom here. Probably right just underneath this line here. You see this line? Just around there. So that should be just above the bottom of the surface here. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on the first point light, this first one, and we want to power it up. So let's go to here and let's set it to something like 400, and it's going to give us more light basically, right? And we can change its color. Let's make that sort of an orangey type color, and we might increase the power maybe a little bit later. Let's click on this point light here, number 1, and we'll set that to 400 as well, and we're going to change its color to like a purple color. You can pick any colors you like, right? We'll click on this one, this is the top one, and we'll set that to 400, and I want to make that like a blue color, maybe like a light blue. And then finally point number 3 that sits towards the footer or the bottom here, we want to make that a yellow color, and again you can choose any color you want and set that to 400. Now the smoke will be lit up by all of these different colors. So if I go back to the first frame and click play, you can see blue at the top here, all of these nice orange and yellows all mixed together, all of these different colors. So we want some nice sort of colors in our scheme, right? This one at the bottom here, we have to kind of strategically light it up. So we're going to light it up when there's a lot of smoke there, but when the smoke fades away, we're going to make this one sort of disappear. There's a couple of reasons for that. It will make more sense as we go along. So let's go back to the first frame. Let's go to File, Save As, and we should save this as version 2. So let's save it as version 2, and we'll click Save. Now what we want to do is increase the resolution of our smoke, right? So what we will do is actually click on the smoke domain, and in the resolution divisions here we're going to set it to 90. And then what we want to do for now, let's see, we want to Let's click play and see how that works. Let's go back to the first frame and play it forward would help. Now you can see the smoke has a bit more resolution to it, and its Blender's starting to slow down. It's at like 7 frames a second, right? You can see it's moving a little bit slower, but it's got um, more detail to it, you could say, right? It's a high resolution. We're going to make even higher resolution than this as well. So let me just do one thing. I made one mistake here. This is set to 445 dissolve time. That should be set to 45, not 445. Because 445 is way too long. It will never dissolve. So let's see how it plays out now. I think that will be okay. I think that's going to be pretty good. And what we want to do now is rotate this object. So we'll click on the Ico Sphere. Let's hit the record button, and we're going to do this at 300 frames. 300. So we enter 300 here. Let's just zoom out a little bit, and we've got the record button. Let's go over to the context object. We're not going to move the object, we're just going to rotate it. So we just need to press the letter I on rotation. Sometimes it's worth pressing the letter I on location as well, just in case you want to move it. If you wanted to move it across the top here and rotate it, you could do that as well. But in this case, we just want to rotate it. So we're going to go all the way down to around frame, let's see, around, we're going to be running this at 30 frames a second, right? So probably around, let's see, 6240, right? So that'll be like 2 seconds off the end. Around here we want to rotate it at least 360 degrees. So we want to rotate on the Z axis, so that we type in 360 here. 360. Now this sphere, let's untick the record button, click play. Now it's going to rotate, right? And that will affect the smoke as well, the way the smoke is simulated, because it's rotating like this. So let's go back, and the next thing we want to do is click back on our smoke domain, go to the physics settings, and in here we want to let's see, open the cache, and in the cache make sure you set it to 300 frames here. You want to cache at 300 frames, and we're going to go to the high resolution, turn that on, and the strength here, set it to 0. We don't need this, but the resolution divisions we're going to set it to 5 here. Make sure you go to file save, and then what we want to do is go to the render settings here, and under volumetrics we want to set it to 2 here, and the samples we can leave at 64, and the shadow samples really we can leave that probably at around 60 should be good. And I think we'll increase our samples maybe a bit to 90 here. Now what you're going to find is Blender's really going to slow down now, right? So I can already feel it lagging. So let's click file save, and if we were to click play, it's going to run really slow. As you can see, it's trying to simulate this high resolution inside of the viewport, and your smoke simulation is going to slow down. Basically that's what it's going to do. But that's not a problem, because we're going to bake all of this data into a cache, and then when we come to render, you have to bake it, to be fair, but when it comes to rendering, we should get some nice smoke simulations. And we're using Eevee, right? We're not using cycles, we're going to be using Eevee to render it all out. So I think this is going to work out pretty well for us. This is quite similar to what I've done before. So I'm going to pause this. You have to be a bit patient with Blender. So now you can see the detail in the smoke. You can see the movement and the detail. One thing we want to do is go to our world settings, and inside our world settings, underneath the color, we want to set it to black, and that's just going to make everything look a lot better, right? You can see here, and you can see all the detail in the smoke, but that's taking Blender a lot of calculations to do that, and we've already sort of done 47 frames, and as it goes further along, it's going to have to do more calculations. It's going to get more complex in your scene. Now one thing I think we should do actually is go back to the first frame. Maybe we'll do, let's go to file, save as, and let's save this as version 3. There's one thing I want to try and do actually is I want the smoke to fade out towards the end, and to do that we have to kind of undo a few things here. It's worth learning this stuff anyway. So we'll click back on the render view, The smart thing to do is when you're working with the smoke simulation, set it back to 8 tile size here, 8, and things will start to move a lot quicker inside your viewport. And if you go back to we've got the smoke domain selected, let's go back to its physics settings here, and let's just turn off high resolution for now. So if we were to click play, everything will move a lot quicker. You can see the simulation is moving a lot quicker. The reason I've done this is I want to see the simulation moving quite quick, because what I want to do is try and get the smoke to fade out towards the end, and we have to control the smoke in order to do that. Okay, so what we want to do is control the density of this smoke. So if I click on the actual Ico Sphere at the top here, here we have density, right? So if I click play, and if I start to bring down the density, let's bring it right down to a 0 value and then go back to the beginning. You'll see no smoke is being emitted, right? If I increase this slightly, you'll get a little bit of smoke coming out. You can see it doesn't really get to the ground, right? It just about touches it. Now if I increase this a bit more, you'll see there's more smoke being appeared, and you can basically see more smoke, and it's going to last longer because the smoke is more dense, right? It's generating more smoke. So we want to control that smoke density. That's what we want to control. At the moment, let's see on this keyframe here, this is our rotation, right? From here to here is our rotation. So if we go back to the first frame and hit the record button, we'll move our mouse cursor over density and press the letter I. And then we want to get to around frame 200 and press the letter I here as well. In fact, we'll move that back, so we can actually click on a keyframe. We can click on it and drag it back, right, to maybe about frame 170. So between frame 170 and frame 240 here, we want to click on density again here, but this time set its value to 0. So in theory, if we untick the record button and click play, our density is set to 1. And it's always set to 1 until it gets to 170 frame. But then on 170 frame, from 170 to 240, the density will start to get reduced here. You'll see that. We should see that getting reduced. Here you can see it sort of moving down, and that means less smoke is being emitted. And it's going to get to a point where it hits 0, and then all of the smoke is being emitted. And you can see it start to fade out, right? At the top here, you can especially see it start to fade out. And really, we want to get the timing in a position where towards our last keyframes, all of the smoke has been rendered out. You can see the Blender's cached it now, so it's moving a lot quicker. So we can actually see this, and I think we need to slightly move our keyframes in order to get the smoke to fully disappear towards the end. It's getting very close to it. If I pause it, you can see the smoke here. If I move it forward a bit more, we can still see smoke on frame 300. So if you're not too fussed about seeing the smoke on frame 300, you could just leave it like that, and then in your post-production you can fade to black, or you can sort of fade this out in post-production afterwards, right? You could do it that way, but let's try and control it a bit more. So what we'll do is just drag this keyframe. So let's click on, we want the density here, right? So let's click here and drag this keyframe backwards to around, let's say around 100, and then on 240 keyframe, let's drag that one back to around 180, around here. Let's just check something. Let's just increase the size here. We should be good. And let's try that again. So Blender might have to recache again a bit. Let's just see. Have to be a bit patient sometimes, and let Blender's caching this in real time, right? So on this keyframe, density should be pretty much finished. Okay, so it's cached it. So let's just see how that fades out towards the end and see if that's fading out very close to a black frame. Yeah, and I think we're pretty much there, right? That looks pretty good to me. So what we can do is pause this. Let's just go to File Save, and press F12 to do a test render. Sometimes it's worth just test rendering. Probably we have to bake this, to be fair, before we can render it. So let's try and bake it now. We'll bake it at kind of a low res, and then we can rebake it afterwards at a high resolution. So we have to click on the smoke domain and go to the physics settings here. Let's see, smoke domain, physics settings, and then we'll click bake all dynamics. And it should bake this pretty quick on your machine because it's at quite a low resolution. It shouldn't take more than like 20-30 seconds to bake this all out. You can see it's going along these keyframes. Then when it comes to baking the high resolution, that's going to take much longer. But if you want high resolution, you've got to pay a price, and the price is time, unfortunately. So a lot of this stuff I normally do, obviously not during work hours. I'm doing this after work because it takes up so much time and it's quite CPU intensive. So let's see this all play out. Yeah, and I think that's going to be pretty good. So let's just go to like a frame around here. Let's press F12 and see what we see in the render. Now you can see the smoke, right? We had to bake it. In theory, you could just go and render out the smoke that looks like this. If I press one keyframe, but you can see it's very blurry. It's not that great, is it? But that is like a version of the smoke simulation you could create, but I don't think it looks very good. Let's just check towards the end frames. Let's say around here. You still kind of see a bit of smoke here, right up here, but I reckon we could deal with that in post-production. So after we've finished our render, we could just fade the last few frames to black, fade them to black, and I think we'll be fine there. So overall, I'm pretty happy with this. What I'm curious about though is, let's see around here. Let's press F12. You can see we've got this spotlight here. So really what I want to do is when the keyframes get to around here, I really want to fade out this yellow light. Start fading it out so you don't really see this spotlight here. If I press F12 now, you can clearly see the spotlight, but everything else is quite sort of dark around it. We don't really want to see that spotlight there like that. So what we do is go to the first frame. Let's hit the record button and let's go and let's find that spotlight. It's this one, number 3. Let's go to its power settings here, right? And what we want to do is press the letter I on the power here, and then we can move across the keyframes and get to a point where the smoke is starting to come down, right? It's getting to that sort of point. Probably what we could do is a similar thing with the this top light. We could probably fade all of them, to be fair, towards the end. If we faded them all to black, then the smoke won't really be seen. So let's see. I reckon around here is a good place to fade out that light, around 190. Let's just press F12 to render on 190. We can see the spotlight there, but what we'll do is press the letter I here, and between 190 and quite quickly, only like 10 frames or something, to 200, let's press the letter I and then set its value to 0. So you can see it's faded out, right? So it'll be like this, and then it will just fade out. And we can probably do a same logic to the other spotlights as well. So 0, 190, 200. I reckon the ones on the side, we're going to keep them because they illuminate the smoke on the side. There is no smoke down here right now, so we don't need to illuminate that. But I reckon the top one, we should get rid of it in a similar way. So let's see. I reckon around that one would be a bit further. So let's just manually do that top one. So I think that's spotlight, let's see, number 3, right? No, number 2. Spotlight number 2. We'll go ahead on the power and hit the letter I, and we'll scrub across. And how much of that blue do we want to see? So around here, the blue is pretty much faded out, right? So if we get to around frame, I would say around frame 210, press the letter I here as well. So this orange line represents no difference between that frame and this frame for this blue power, the light power here, 400. And then we'll move to like frame, let's see, I reckon around frame 230, hit the letter I here, and then set its value to 0. So that will fade out, and the ones on the side should fade out automatically. Those ones should be pretty good. So we've got quite a lot of black keyframes towards the end. Let's see, probably up to 270, and it's not really worth rendering out black keyframes. There's no point in doing that. So the wise thing for us to do though is to bake it out in high resolution, because in low resolution you may not see some of the smoke. Like around here you can still see a bit of smoke, right? But in low resolution you're not really going to see it too well. So let's try and bake this out in high resolution first. So I reckon the keyframing is done now. Let's go to file save as, and let's set it back to 4. Okay, so before we bake the actual frames out, we should untick this record button. Just turn it off if you're not using it. Let's go and click on the output settings, and let's make sure we set it to 30 frames a second. That's one thing we should do. Let's go to the render settings here, and in the volumetrics let's set it back to tile size 2, and we'll leave the samples at 90, and I think the shadows will leave. Okay, before we do the bake, the last thing I want to do is just go back up to the render settings here and set the render up here to 256. In the viewport you can leave it at 16. In the render we'll set it to 256. We've still got the smoke domain selected, so let's go to the physics settings here, and we need to bake this now. So just make sure you go to file save before you bake, and then we'll go to bake all dynamics. So click on bake all dynamics, and you're going to see the timeline moving, and as the scene gets more and more complex, this timeline will start to slow down. We should start to see that slow down due to the complexity of the scene, right? So let's see what happens here. In fact, what I'm going to do is press escape for the moment, and let's just scrub through these first few frames. So here we can see the high resolution being baked, right? Let's actually bake this in, and we can see it's getting quite complex compared to the low resolution version. So I've already baked a few frames. I just wanted to make sure I could see something. Let me go back to the first frame, and what we'll do is say delete bake, and we're going to bake it one more time. But while it's baking, I'm going to pause this video because this is going to take quite a bit of time, maybe about 10-15 minutes. Okay, so what I've done is I've stopped Blender from completing this bake. So it's supposed to bake all 300 frames. I've stopped it on like around frame 80-90. Simply it's going to take quite a long time for it to bake all of that. You're going to find out on your own machine it's going to take quite a long time to bake at quite a high resolution smoke simulation. So if I go to the render settings here, you can see how dynamic this smoke simulation is going to be, right? If I click on these frames, you can see the complexity inside of there. So Blender's got to calculate all of that, and your viewport is going to become quite sluggish. That's just down to the memory on your machine. If you've got a very powerful machine, then I assume it will work a lot better for you. The reason why I kind of paused it is I've already created a demonstration video that I'll put up on YouTube, and I've already baked everything, and I've already rendered out all of the frames. So it makes no sense for me to sit here and wait for it to bake again, because that's taking up time. So what I'm going to do is click here to close this. I'm just going to click on the save button to save that. I'm going to close this folder, and on my desktop I've got a demo version. Now if I open up the untitled here, really it should have been called smoke simulation or something. You can see the same sphere, you can see the light sources. This one was set up slightly differently. I think the one we're creating today is better because the light sources are off the sort of camera view, and there was a few little bugs in this one, like this light source started to move, which I didn't really want to happen. But if I move through the frames, we can kind of see the same sort of logic here, right? The same sort of high resolution and it fading out. I think the new one that we're creating today is a bit better, to be fair. I learned a few lessons from this one, and I'm trying to apply them and give you that knowledge as well. But if I click on render view, here you can just see the render view of this smoke simulation. So the main differences between this one and the one we're creating right now, this is the demo one that I put onto YouTube, it's just the colors really, and maybe a little bit to do with the position of the sphere. But apart from anything of that, it still rotates, it's still generating the smoke, and it's still got collisions and all that stuff is still in here. The reason why I'm going to this particular file is I've already baked everything. I baked all 300 frames, and it took quite a bit of time to bake them all. So what we really need to do now is go and render out all of these frames. Yeah, we need to render out one by one. A little bit of advice for you, and you probably won't see this unless I tell you. Inside of the folder, so inside the folder that you're working on, you're going to see another folder called Blender Cache. Yeah, and if I look at this Blender Cache here, what this is Blender's creating what is called a cache for all the dynamics of this smoke simulation, and some files are like 112, 130 meg, and there's 106 of them, right? So once you're done with your animation, you've rendered it all out and you're happy with everything looks great, my advice is to delete this Blender cache. It's 14.9 gig on my computer, so you can imagine that's taking up quite a lot of space. This one I think was just a test one, right? So this one I can really delete anyway. This one here, let's just delete this. So this Blender cache, once you've rendered everything out, I would advise that you delete that. You can keep it if you want. If you delete it, you have to rebake again later if you want to do something with that simulation. But more than likely, I would never re-render this sort of work again. It will be a one-time thing, and then I'll go and do something completely different. So I'll keep that cache there for now. But we need to now render out our work. So what you should be doing is opening up your version 4 of your work now, the new one that we're creating here today, and you should see all of the cache here, right? There should be like a black line going all the way across to the end to frame 300. That means you have a full cache of your smoke simulation at high resolution, and it should look quite impressive, right? You can play around with the lighting now. You don't have to render out in these particular lights. The lights shouldn't affect the cache, I don't think. Let's just test that to make sure. If we click here and go to the light source, let's click on this one. Let's leave it as a spotlight. If we were to change that to green, then we'll have green in there. But it looks like it did break the cache as well, possibly. Let's see. Yeah, so my advice is get your lighting first correct, because if you change it, you might have to rebake everything. So I'm not going to save this. I'm going to close this and discard it. I'm going to open it. In fact, what I might do is just right click here and create a copy, right? Let's see, cache 4. Those are all the files that have been cached already. If I open it, then we should see the cache here again, yeah? So be a bit careful, because it seems like if you change the light, I don't see why that is, but I guess it's down to the shadows and stuff, because inside here we turned on shadows, volumetric shadows. So if you start changing light sources, that's going to affect the shadows in your simulation as well. That makes kind of sense. That's probably why Blender will have to go ahead and recache everything if you change certain settings. I'm not quite convinced about that though, so let's see. Let's try and change it and see what happens. Let's go back to the render view, because I don't see that black line here anyway. I think maybe if we click on smoke domain, we'll see it, right? So if we click on smoke domain, in fact, maybe I'm wrong. If we click on smoke domain, we see the cache. If we click on the point light, let's click on one of them, this one here. Let's change its color and see if that cache is still there. Let's change it to like a green color like we suggested, right? And let's make it a stronger green. Let's make it around 800. Let's see what happens. So if we set it to 800 and go back to the smoke domain, we can still see the cache there. So the light source doesn't actually affect the cache, it seems. Seems the cache will be fine. It will still render out. And you may want to brighten up your light sources as well. These ones at this sort of power might be a bit too dull. So if we went back to that spotlight on the where is it, on the right hand side, left hand side, this one, let's find it, number 1, this one here, this one right here, it's set to 800. So let's set it to something silly like 2500, and then you're going to see much brighter light. Obviously this green one is quite bright, but the yellow one on the other side is very weak. So if you increase one side, you should really increase the other. So if we click on this one, this is like a purple one, right? Let's set that to 2500, and then you'll get the mix of the colors in here. If we go back to the smoke domain, let's just move forward a few frames. and then you can play around with the lighting and try and get a render out that, or try and see something in the viewport that you like. These sort of colors mixed together, if you like them, you're good to go. So once you're good to go to File, Save, go back to the first frame, and we're going to do something slightly different today. We're going to go to the output settings and make sure it's on frame 1 to 300, yeah, like this, 30 frames a second, and we're going to leave it on PNG sequence here, PNG, and you're going to set it to RGB and set it to 16 color depth and leave it on 15% compression. Go to open up this folder and then go to your desktop and find your animation sequence, right? And then click here to create a new folder and just call that image sequence. Just call it image sequence. Open up that folder and you're going to save your files in here. So just click accept, and then all you've got to do is press Control and F12. Go and make yourself a very, very big cup of tea, because it's going to take probably a good couple of hours to render out all of those frames. It's going to take a long time. It ain't going to be a quick job. So normally I'll do this stuff when I'm doing something else, but definitely don't want to be rendering out these frames while you're trying to work on some business stuff or whatever you're doing, because your computer is pretty much going to be very, very slow. So when you press Control F12, it may look like Blender's crashed, but give it a good few minutes before you try and do anything, because those first few frames tend to take a bit of time, and the longer it gets along this timeline, the more complex the smoke simulation, the longer that particular frame is going to take. But you're doing this at a very high resolution, so you should get a good end result. So what I'm going to do, let's just imagine hypothetically that we've gone and pressed Control F12 and we've rendered out all of our frames. I'm going to close this and discard it. Don't really want to save anything in here. And I'm going to go to this demo version that I created. And once you've got all of your images rendered out, you should see something like this, a PNG sequence, right? Let's just open this. And here you can see the sequence that I rendered out. Yep, I went through the pain of rendering out all of these 300 frames. I basically just left my machine doing this while I went out for a little walk or whatever I was doing, and come back later, and all of these have been rendered out. So if we click on one, we can see the simulation here, right? The smoke effect that you're going to get. And what we want to do now is take all of these images and create a video file from it. So let's open up this. What we can do is actually just open up a fresh new Blender file. It doesn't have to be the original one. We just click on General here. Let me just turn on my hotkeys again. I think I may have turned them off, right? Let's just turn these on. I think it's going to make much difference. We're going to go to this plus sign, go to video editing, and go to video editing here. And inside video editing, we want to add a film strip. So we're going to click add, let's see, image sequence. And we'll go back to my desktop. I'm going to go to the demo version. And in the PNG sequence here, I'm going to press the letter A. And letter A will select every single file in here. So if we scroll across, you're going to see all of the files are selected. We're going to click add image strip. And now you can see the image strip in here. And if I scroll across, you're going to see the smoke effect here, right? Remember, this is the demo one that I created before. Your one will look a little bit different, but quite similar. So now we just want to export this. We're going to export it at 30 frames, but this time for the file format, I'm going to set it to AVI JPEG. AVI JPEG. I'll leave it at 90% compression RGB here. I'll click the open folder, go back to my desktop. We'll go to, we'll save it in this new image sequence here, the new project we're working on. Let's just call it Smoke Simulation -01, and we'll click accept here. And what do we need to do? We need to press Control and F12. And what Blender will do now is take every single frame and stitch it together to make a video. There's 300 frames, that's going to take a little bit of time. So what I'll do is pause the video and we'll take a look at this demo version that I created before as a PNG sequence, or an AVI file, should I say. Okay, so I made a slight error there. If I minimize this and open up this folder that we're working on, we will see the AVI file here. But if we were to play it, you can see at the end it says 250. That means we only rendered at 250 of the 300 frames. I'm just going to fix that now and quickly show you how to fix that. It doesn't take long to render this out. So we set everything up in the image sequence here, but the one thing we neglected to do is we set this to 30 frames, but we didn't set this to 300 frames. So Blender only did 250 of the 300 frames in total. So just make sure you set this to 300. You can leave pretty much everything as it was before, but this has to be set to 300 if your animation contained the 300 frames. So I'm going to save this. In fact, we don't need to save it. We're just going to press Control and F12 and redo that image sequence again. It will take maybe 2 minutes to do that. So I'll pause it and we'll come back and look at it again. Okay, so Blender's resequenced all of those PNG files into a video file. It's done all 300. We can close this and close this as well and just discard it, and we can go into this folder, and this is the demo one that I created and put on YouTube. So already I've taken the image sequence here, well actually from the demo version here, I've taken this PNG sequence. You should have a folder like this now with all of the sequenced images, and then we've just combined all of that into an AVI file. So if I open this, we can see that playing out now, and we might set this on a repeat. Bear in mind, this is the demo version. This is not, your one will look actually slightly different depending on what colors you've used and you know, how much you've rotated this object as well. But that rotation gives some nice sort of smoke effects. You can see the smoke swirling as it's coming down rather than being quite static. So I reckon you can get some really good animation sequence out of it. The only disadvantage of this whole process is it does take quite a long time to bake, and it even takes longer to render. But this is not something you're probably going to be doing every day. It's probably, you know, once in a while you can have some fun with smoke simulations and build something quite nice like this, very dynamic. Looks pretty cool. This was the demo version, so I can see some errors in here. Things like we should have resolved quite a lot of those in the tutorial we've just done today. So if I scroll through this, this blue light source, for whatever reason, it got animated in my demo version. I didn't want it to be moving. So you can see it moving here. You can see the blue light source moving there. I don't really want that, so that was a mistake that I made in the demo version when I was building it. But we haven't done anything like that in our example tutorial. Probably what I'll do is let's just move forward a few frames, and I think towards the end we didn't really, my demo one, it didn't fade out properly. You can see on this frame here it just kind of disappears, so something went not quite right there. But on the left hand side it faded out a bit better. This yellow faded out better. So hopefully we resolved that in this current tutorial. But if you do have an error like that at the end, something like this that doesn't look quite right, you can just fade it out. Maybe around here you can do like a fade to black in post-production or something, and it will smoothen it all out, the transition. So nothing's lost here. It's all good. So if we open up this let's open up the high-res version we're working on today. I'm going to go to this version 4, and I want to just render out one test frame. So probably this frame here looks pretty good. Let's try and go forward a bit more. Maybe, let's see, probably around, let's try and get right to the end, somewhere around here, 93. So I'm going to render out this one test frame. That's going to take a little bit of time to render, and we'll see what the colors and everything looks like at high resolution once it's rendered out. So let me pause the video, I'll render out this one frame and we'll check it to see what it looks like. Okay, so here we can see one test frame. It's taken 1 minute and 14 seconds to render out that one single frame. That was at position 90, right, keyframe 96. So it took 1 minute and 14 seconds. So you can imagine if you're going to render out 300 of these frames. Let's do some maths here. So 1 minute and 14 seconds, 60 plus 14 is 74 seconds, right? Times by 300, and you're going to get 22,200 seconds. Divide that by 60 will give us just under 4 hours to render out all of those frames. To be fair, it might be quicker than that. Some of the start frames and towards the end, the smoke simulation is a lot less complex in this scene, so you expect those ones to render out a lot quicker. So I think this looks pretty good. I would probably do something with this light source, maybe make it a bit darker and then sort of brighten it up as the smoke fills up around it, but I think it will look okay as well. I think it should be fine, or maybe move it to a different position so that it's not shown in the render, but I don't think it's a problem, to be fair, because we've kind of faded in and faded out towards the end anyway, so it doesn't get shown. So I think it should be okay. I think it will be fine. So hopefully you've now gone and rendered out your animation, and it'll be nice to actually see it. So if you upload any of your videos or your sort of Blender work onto YouTube or any other location, then send me a link, please. Send me a link in the YouTube description, or send it to me on Facebook. You'll see this tutorial on Facebook as well. Or if you upload it to Instagram, then tag me on your Instagram, and then I'll take a look and I'll write a little comment to tell you what I think about your animation smoke work as well. I'll probably be doing some more smoke simulations in the near future. For now, we'll stick with this one. This is like a good example of how to control the smoke, how to get high resolution. I think in cycles it will look a lot better, to be fair. So if we were to move over to cycles, although it's looking quite pixelated and stuff like this, there's ways in cycles to smooth all of this out. And I think the new version of Blender 2.81, I know that there's some new features in there to speed up rendering and also to smooth out any of these sort of like pixelation and stuff like this. It all depends on, you know, your render settings and your samples. It's going to really affect how this looks like in cycles. But for most of my tutorials, we'll focus on using Eevee, because it's just a quicker render engine to work with. So let's go ahead and close this down. Hopefully your tutorial came out pretty well. Okay, so one last thing I'd like to ask you to do is, if you open up your web browser, you can get to my YouTube page here. I'll put a link to that in the YouTube description. And if you click on videos here, you can see loads of the different videos I've been creating. A lot of it's to do with Blender, but there's such a mixed variety of applications that I try and do stuff on. There's bookkeeping and there's all sorts in here, right? So if you see any of my videos and you're watching them, if you enjoy them, then please try and share them on your Facebook, your Twitter accounts, wherever you can share my content. That will help me to give my channel a little bit of a boost. So I appreciate that a lot. So let's take, for example, this YouTube free sound effects. If you watch this tutorial and if you liked it, then just go ahead and click on the share button here. You can share it on Twitter, Facebook, you can put it on your Reddit account, you can share it on LinkedIn or Pinterest. Wherever you can share my content, that will be much appreciated. So I'll thank you for that in advance. That's the end of this tutorial, and I look forward to seeing you on the next DCP Way tutorial.